The Harper family seemed like any other happy family in their suburban neighborhood. Dave, a dedicated husband and father, worked tirelessly to provide for his family, while Melissa, his loving wife, managed the household and their two young children. At 29, Melissa had taken on responsibilities beyond her years, especially since she had raised her younger sister, Emily, after their parents' tragic death in a car accident a decade ago. Emily, now 19, had grown up under Melissa's care, with Melissa assuming a motherly role to fill the void left by their parents. From a young age, Emily had been a troubled child. The loss of her parents had left her emotionally scared, and she acted out, displaying manipulative behavior to get what she wanted. Melissa, despite her own grief, had done her best to guide Emily, offering her love and support while trying to keep her on the right path. Emily's childhood was marked by bouts of anger, deceit, and a constant need for attention, traits that only seemed to intensify it as she grew older. Dave had always seen Emily as his younger sister-in-law, someone he needed to protect and support. He had met Melissa when Emily was just 9 years old, and he had watched her grow up alongside their own children. For years, he had dismissed Emily's antics as those of a troubled child trying to cope with her traumatic past. He never imagined that those same manipulative tendencies would evolve into something far more dangerous. As Emily entered her late teens, her behavior seemed to stabilize. She appeared more composed, her manipulative tendencies hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy. Melissa was relieved, believing that Emily had finally outgrown her troubled past. However, beneath the surface, Emily's manipulative nature was merely lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. She had learned to mask her true self, appearing as a well-adjusted young woman to those around her. Emily's transformation was not just emotional but physical as well. She had blossomed into a striking young woman, her beauty undeniable. Her once childish features had matured, and she carried herself with a newfound confidence that caught the attention of many, including Dave. Unbeknownst to Melissa, Emily had harbored a growing infatuation with Dave, seeing him as more than just her brother-in-law. To her, he was a challenge, a conquest she was determined to achieve, regardless of the consequences. In the Harper household, life went on as usual. Melissa was busy with the children and household chores, while Dave juggled his demanding job and family responsibilities. Emily's presence in their lives was a constant reminder of the past, but they believed she had turned over a new leaf. Little did they know, Emily was biding her time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to put her plans into motion, a plan that would ultimately lead to tragedy and heartbreak. As the years passed, Emily's transformation from a troublesome child into a beautiful young woman became increasingly evident. Her once gawky and awkward demeanor had given way to a confident and alluring presence that was hard to ignore. At 19, Emily had developed a figure that turned heads wherever she went. Her long, brow-red hair cascaded down her back in waves, framing a face that had grown strikingly beautiful. Her eyes, once filled with childish mischief, now held a deeper, more calculating gaze. Dave, who had always seen Emily as a little sister, began to notice these changes. It was impossible not to. She carried herself with a new confidence, her every move calculated to draw attention. Emily had learned the art of subtle seduction, and she wielded it like a weapon. She wore clothes that accentuated her curves, and her makeup was always flawlessly applied. Her behavior around Dave began to shift in small, almost imperceptible ways, but enough to stir a sense of unease within him. Melissa, busy with the demands of motherhood and household chores, remained blissfully unaware of the growing tension. She trusted Emily implicitly, never suspecting that her younger sister harbored feelings that went beyond familial affection. Dave, too, tried to push away the nagging thoughts that crept into his mind. After all, Emily was family. She had been through so much, and he couldn't imagine her intentions being anything other than innocent. But Emily's actions spoke louder than words, and Dave found it increasingly difficult to ignore the signs. Emily's flirtations started subtly. A lingering touch on his arm, a playful smile thrown his way when Melissa wasn't looking, or a suggestive comment masked as a joke. Dave initially dismissed these actions, attributing them to Emily's naturally affectionate personality. However, as time went on, her advances became more overt. She would lean in closer when speaking to him, her body language clearly indicating her interest. Dave felt a growing discomfort, but also an undeniable attraction that he struggled to suppress. It was during family gatherings that Emily's behavior became most apparent. She would make a point of sitting next to Dave, her presence a constant distraction. When Melissa's back was turned, Emily would lock eyes with him, her gaze filled with a provocative challenge. It was as if she was daring him to acknowledge the tension between them. Dave, torn between loyalty to his wife and the growing temptation, tried his best to ignore Emily's advances, but his resolve weakened with each passing day. One evening, while Melissa was out shopping for groceries, Emily seized the opportunity to escalate her game. She entered the living room where Dave was sitting, her attire more provocative than usual. A short dress hugged her curves, and her legs, encased in sheer tights, seemed impossibly long. The scent of her perfume wafted through the air, a heady mix of floral and musk that made Dave's head spin. She moved with a deliberate slowness, aware of the effect she was having on him. "Dave," she purred, her voice low and seductive. "Can I sit with you for a bit? It's been so long since we talked." Dave swallowed hard, his eyes involuntarily following her movements as she approached. He nodded, unable to find his voice. Emily smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes as she settled down next to him, her body pressing against his. She began to talk, her words a meaningless hum in his ears as he struggled to focus. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to get up, to put distance between them, but he was rooted to the spot, ensnared by her presence. Emily leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear. "You know, Dave," she whispered, her hand resting lightly on his thigh. "I've always admired you. You've been so good to me, to all of us." Dave's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and arousal coursing through him. He wanted to push her away, to tell her that this was wrong, but his body betrayed him. Emily's hand moved higher, her touch both electrifying and terrifying. She tilted her head, her lips brushing against his jawline, sending shivers down his spine. "Emily," he managed to croak, his voice strained. "What are you doing?" She pulled back slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "What do you think I'm doing, Dave?" she asked, her voice a seductive whisper. "I'm showing you how much I appreciate everything you've done for me." Before he could respond, Emily closed the distance between them, her lips capturing his in a searing kiss. Dave's mind screamed in protest, but his body responded instinctively. He kissed her back, the years of suppressed attraction and the tension of the moment converging into a single explosive act of passion. Emily's hands roamed over his body, her touch igniting a fire that threatened to consume him. When the kiss finally broke, both of them were breathless. Emily's eyes gleamed with triumph, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "See, Dave," she murmured. "This is our little secret." Dave stared at her, a mix of shame and desire churning within him. He knew he should stop this, that he was on the brink of a precipice from which there would be no return. But Emily's allure was too powerful, her seduction too intoxicating. He was trapped in a web of his own making, and Emily was the spider at the center, patiently waiting to ensnare him completely. The tension in the Harper household was palpable. Dave's struggle to maintain his composure around Emily grew increasingly difficult. He found himself avoiding eye contact, staying out of rooms she occupied, and immersing himself in work to escape the whirlwind of emotions she stirred within him. However, Emily's relentless pursuit showed no signs of abating. Her every action seemed meticulously designed to draw him further into her web of seduction. It was a particularly hectic week when the situation escalated. Melissa's mother had fallen ill, necessitating Melissa's immediate attention and frequent trips to her parents' home several towns over. Dave supported his wife fully, taking on additional responsibilities at home to ease her burden. He juggled work, house chores, and caring for their two young children. It was during one of these trips that Emily saw her opportunity to strike. Emily arrived at the house looking stunning, her beauty and confidence almost ethereal. She wore a short, form-fitting dress that accentuated her curves, sheer tights that highlighted her long legs, and makeup that enhanced her striking features. A delicate, intoxicating perfume lingered around her, adding to her allure. Dave couldn't help but notice the transformation, and he felt a familiar, unwelcome heat rise within him. The evening began innocuously enough. Emily played with the children, her laughter filling the house and momentarily masking the underlying tension. Dave busied himself with chores, avoiding prolonged interactions with her. As the night wore on, and the children were tucked into bed, the atmosphere shifted. The house grew quiet, save for the occasional creak of settling wood, and Dave's sense of foreboding intensified. Emily entered the living room, where Dave was seated, her presence commanding his attention. She moved gracefully, her every step a calculated move in their dangerous dance. She sat down beside him, her body angled towards his, and the proximity sent a jolt of nervous energy through him. She began to talk, her words a meaningless hum in his ears as he struggled to focus. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to get up, to put distance between them, but he was rooted to the spot, ensnared by her presence. Emily leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear. She rested her hand lightly on his thigh, sending shivers down his spine. He wanted to push her away, to tell her that this was wrong, but his body betrayed him. Her hand moved higher, her touch both electrifying and terrifying. She tilted her head, her lips brushing against his jawline, sending shivers down his spine. Dave's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and arousal coursing through him. He knew he should stop this, that he was on the brink of a precipice from which there would be no return. But Emily's allure was too powerful, her seduction too intoxicating. He was trapped in a web of his own making, and Emily was the spider at the center, patiently waiting to ensnare him completely. Before he could react, Emily shifted, positioning herself on his lap, her arms winding around his neck. His hands instinctively moved to push her away, but she was quicker. She arched her back, her body pressing intimately against his, and whispered in his ear, "This is our little secret." Dave's resistance wavered, the lines between right and wrong blurring in the face of Emily's relentless seduction. She rolled up her dress, exposing her firm buttocks, and guided his hands to rest on them. Her kisses trailed lower, igniting a fire within him that he struggled to extinguish. His reluctance melted away, replaced by an overpowering desire. In a haze of conflicting emotions, Dave succumbed. Emily undressed, her movements confident and deliberate, and she satisfied him sexually, her every touch a potent mix of pleasure and taboo. When it was over, she dressed as if nothing had happened, a serene smile playing on her lips. She went to the kitchen to prepare dinner, acting as if everything was perfectly normal. Dave remained in the living room, his mind a whirlwind of guilt and confusion. He had crossed a line, one from which there was no return. The echo of Emily's touch lingered on his skin, a constant reminder of his betrayal. He knew he had to confront her, to put an end to this dangerous game, but the power she held over him was undeniable. When Melissa returned home later that evening, everything appeared normal. The children were asleep, the house was tidy, and a delicious meal awaited her. Emily greeted her sister with a warm smile, playing the role of the dutiful younger sibling to perfection. Dave, however, could barely look Melissa in the eye, the weight of his actions bearing down on him. As the days turned into weeks, Emily's presence became an inescapable part of Dave's life. She visited frequently, her flirtations growing bolder, her manipulations more cunning. Dave tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the tension between them was a constant, throbbing undercurrent that threatened to unravel everything. The weeks following Emily's first successful seduction attempt were a whirlwind of tension and guilt for Dave. Each visit from Emily seemed to further blur the lines of propriety and decency. Melissa, oblivious to the undercurrents that ran through their home, continued to trust her younger sister implicitly. Emily, on the other hand, used her sister's trust as a shield, allowing her to escalate her advances on Dave with increasing boldness. Emily's manipulative nature, once a source of mild annoyance, now became a weapon of emotional and psychological warfare. She had always known how to get what she wanted, but now her sights were set firmly on Dave, and she was relentless. Melissa frequently had to return to her parents' home to assist with her mother's recovery, leaving Emily and Dave alone together. Each of these absences provided Emily with ample opportunity to deepen her control over Dave. Dave's internal conflict grew with each passing day. He was racked with guilt and shame, unable to reconcile his actions with his love for Melissa. He wanted to protect his marriage, to keep his family intact, but Emily's allure was a constant, nagging temptation that he found increasingly difficult to resist. He was trapped in a cycle of desire and remorse, each encounter with Emily pulling him further into a web of deceit and betrayal. Emily's behavior during these visits was a masterclass in manipulation. She would arrive looking demure and innocent, dressed in casual clothes that belied her true intentions. She played the role of the caring aunt and helpful sister-in-law to perfection, ensuring that Melissa remained blissfully unaware of the true nature of her interactions with Dave. However, once Melissa was out of sight, Emily's demeanor would shift dramatically. On one such occasion, Melissa had to leave for her parents' home unexpectedly. She had barely stepped out the door when Emily moved to the kitchen, where Dave was preparing dinner. The sound of her heels clicking on the floor announced her approach, and Dave's heart sank with dread and anticipation. He had resolved to confront her, to put an end to this madness once and for all, but his resolve wavered as she drew nearer. Emily stood behind him, her presence a palpable force. She reached out, her fingers grazing the back of his neck lightly. Dave froze, his body reacting instinctively to her touch. Emily's hand slid down his back, lingering at his waist before moving to the front of his trousers. She caressed him suggestively, her intentions unmistakable. Dave turned around abruptly, grabbing her wrist and pulling her away from him. He led her into the bedroom, his grip firm but not harsh. He hoped that confronting her in private would allow him to regain some semblance of control over the situation. Emily, however, was unfazed. She smiled, her eyes gleaming with mischief and triumph. He told her in no uncertain terms that their interactions had to stop. He couldn't continue this way, living a lie and betraying the woman he loved. Emily's response was calm and calculated. She assured him that there was nothing to worry about, that she was all his and ready to do whatever he wanted. Her words were seductive, dripping with promises of pleasure and secrecy. Dave's mind raced, torn between the desire to protect his marriage and the overwhelming temptation that Emily represented. He shouted at her to get dressed and leave, hoping that his anger would mask the fear and desire that churned within him. Emily's expression shifted from seductive to angry. She played her next card with chilling precision. She threatened to tell Melissa everything, to paint Dave as the aggressor who had molested her and forced her to satisfy him. Her words were like a dagger to his heart, and his rage bubbled to the surface. He grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her and telling her to keep her mouth shut or face the consequences. Emily smiled, a cruel, knowing smile, and ordered Dave to kneel before her and kiss her feet. The sheer audacity of her demand stunned him. In a fit of rage, he pushed her away, grabbing her things and dragging her out of the house. Emily's screams echoed through the quiet neighborhood, a haunting reminder of the precariousness of his situation. She swore that he would regret his actions, that she would get what she wanted one way or another. Dave was left standing in the doorway, his heart pounding and his mind racing. He had narrowly avoided a catastrophic revelation, but the threat still loomed large. Emily's manipulations had reached a dangerous peak, and he knew that his life was on a knife edge. He had to find a way to extricate himself from this nightmare, but he felt trapped, ensnared by his own weakness and Emily's cunning. Melissa returned home later that evening, none the wiser to the drama that had unfolded in her absence. She spoke excitedly about plans for a dinner to celebrate her mother's recovery and mentioned inviting Emily to join them. Dave's heart sank at the thought, but he forced a smile, agreeing that it was a good idea. He hoped that maintaining a facade of normalcy would protect his family, even as the foundations of his life crumbled beneath him. Dave's mind was a tumultuous sea of regret and fear. The constant pressure of Emily's manipulations weighed heavily on him, and his guilt over betraying Melissa gnawed at his conscience. He had hoped to protect his family by keeping the secret, but Emily's threats loomed over him like a dark cloud. Every time he looked at Melissa, his heart ached with the burden of his deceit. The upcoming dinner to celebrate Melissa's mother's recovery felt like a ticking time bomb, with Emily's presence promising to escalate the already volatile situation. The day of the dinner arrived, and the house was a flurry of activity. Melissa, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents threatening to tear her family apart, was in high spirits. She busied herself with preparations, the joy of her mother's recovery evident in every action. Dave tried to match her enthusiasm, but his nerves were frayed, and his mind raced with dark thoughts about what Emily might do. As the evening progressed, the children were put to bed, and the adults continued their celebration. It was during a lull in the festivities that Melissa noticed they were out of mayonnaise, a crucial ingredient for one of the dishes. She announced that she would run to the store to get some, leaving Dave and Emily alone in the house. Dave's heart pounded in his chest as he watched her leave, dread pooling in his stomach. Emily arrived, her demeanor deceptively innocent. She greeted Melissa warmly, her performance as the doting younger sister flawless. Dave watched her warily, his stomach knotting with anxiety. Emily's smile held a hint of triumph, a silent reminder that she held the power to destroy everything he held dear. The dinner began without incident, but the tension in the air was palpable to Dave. He forced himself to participate in the conversation, to laugh at the appropriate moments, but his mind was elsewhere, fixated on the looming threat Emily posed. The moment Melissa was out of the door, Emily's demeanor shifted. She sauntered into the kitchen where Dave was standing, her eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Dave tried to ignore her, focusing on the task at hand, but Emily was relentless. She approached him, her body pressing against his as she reached for his crotch. Dave recoiled, his temper flaring. Without thinking, he lashed out, slapping her across the face. Emily stumbled back, her eyes wide with shock and fury. She fell to the floor, sobbing theatrically. Before Dave could react, she pulled a small knife from her pocket and stabbed him in the leg. Pain shot through him, and he cried out, collapsing to the floor. At that moment, the front door opened, and Melissa walked in, her expression turning to one of horror as she took in the scene before her. Emily, clutching the knife, was crying and accusing Dave of attacking her. Dave, his leg bleeding profusely, tried to explain what had happened, but the pain and shock made it difficult to articulate. Melissa was paralyzed with confusion and fear. She looked from her sobbing sister to her injured husband, unable to comprehend the situation. Emily, ever the manipulator, played the victim to perfection, painting Dave as the aggressor. She cried and clung to Melissa, begging her to believe that Dave had attacked her. Dave, struggling to stay conscious, knew that he had to act quickly. He pulled the knife from his leg, the pain almost blinding. His mind was a fog of agony and betrayal, but he managed to speak, his voice strained and desperate. He told Melissa the truth, admitting that he had been weak and had succumbed to Emily's advances once. He explained that Emily had been manipulating him, using their illicit encounter to control and threaten him. Melissa's face was a mask of shock and disbelief. She looked at Emily, whose tears and sobs seemed suddenly less genuine. A flicker of doubt crossed her face as she recalled all the times she had suspected Emily of being manipulative, but had dismissed it as sibling rivalry. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, and she realized the extent of her sister's deceit. Dave, lying on the floor, his leg bleeding and his strength waning, saw the moment of realization in Melissa's eyes. He pleaded with her to believe him, to see through Emily's lies. Melissa's expression hardened as she finally understood the truth. She pushed Emily away, her eyes filled with betrayal and anger. Emily, seeing her control slipping away, made a desperate move. She grabbed the knife from where Dave had dropped it and lunged at Melissa. Dave, summoning the last of his strength, sprang up and caught Emily, wresting the knife from her grasp. He pushed her away, his mind a blur of pain and fury. Emily stumbled back, her eyes wild with fear and rage. In a frantic bid to escape, Emily ran out of the house. Dave, barely able to stand, watched her go, his heart pounding with a mix of relief and dread. The sound of a car horn and a screeching of brakes filled the air, followed by a sickening thud. Melissa and Dave rushed outside, their hearts in their throats. On the road, a car had come to a stop, its front dented from the impact. Emily's body lay motionless a few meters away, the life drained from her. The driver, pale and shaking, was on the phone, calling for an ambulance. It was too late. Emily's reckless escape had ended in tragedy. The police and paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do for Emily. Her life had ended as dramatically as she had lived it, her manipulations and deceit ultimately leading to her demise. The driver was questioned but was soon cleared of any wrongdoing. Emily had run into the road, sealing her own fate. Dave was taken to the hospital, where his wound was treated. He was weak from blood loss but would recover physically. The emotional scars, however, would take much longer to heal. Melissa stayed by his side, her mind reeling from the events of the evening. She had lost her sister, but she had also gained a painful understanding of the truth. In the aftermath, Melissa and Dave had many difficult conversations. Dave's admission of his weakness and betrayal was a heavy burden on their marriage, but Melissa, understanding the extent of Emily's manipulations, chose to forgive him. They both knew that the road to healing would be long and fraught with challenges, but they were determined to rebuild their lives together. As the police pieced together the narrative, it became clear that Emily had been the instigator in her seduction of Dave, using her wiles to create a scenario in which she could control and manipulate him. Dave's confession about the single instance of infidelity was a bitter pill for Melissa to swallow, but it also highlighted the extent of Emily's manipulative prowess. Despite the tumultuous events and the profound betrayal, Melissa could never completely let go of her love for Emily. She was haunted by memories of her younger sister, the mischievous child who had once looked up to her with innocent eyes, the teenager who had struggled to find her place in the world, and even the manipulative young woman who had ultimately brought chaos into their lives. Emily had been so many things to Melissa: a sister, a responsibility, a challenge, and in many ways, a daughter. In the quiet moments, when the house was still and the children were asleep, Melissa often found herself lost in thoughts of Emily. Melissa often found herself at Emily's grave, seeking solace in the place where her sister now rested. She would kneel by the headstone, running her fingers over the engraved letters of Emily's name, and speak to her as if she were still alive. She shared her grief, her regrets, and her enduring love. She apologized for not being able to save her, for not being the sister and mother figure Emily needed. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke aloud, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, that I couldn't make things right. I loved you so much, and I still do. You were my little sister, my responsibility. I wanted to be there for you, to help you find your way, but I failed. I hope you can forgive me."